racist means to me. And it really means recognizing that good people can do racist things. And that even if a person doesn't self-identify as a racist, and even if the intent is not racist, the actions can be. It means understanding that I benefit from structural racism, even as I seek to understand its impact, and even as I seek to work to dismantle it. It means that being colorblind erases the narrative and truth of white supremacy. And it means that celebrating diversity is wholly insufficient. I've been looking forward to this panel and being in the presence of all of you, because this has been a salve for my soul after a terrible week. It is another death. It is unacceptable. And racism built this country and it is tearing it apart. Racism is killing people with feet on necks and calls to police and missing murdered Aboriginal women that the police dismiss as runaways, with lack of healthcare access and pay inequity and incarceration and housing insecurity and violence and this pandemic. So, with this hurt and harm, we might just say the system is broken, but it's not. Here are the wise words of Dr. Adrienne Keene. She is an American writer, activist, Stanford grad, and founder of Native Appropriations. She said, the system designed by male white supremacist slave owners on stolen indigenous land protects their interests. It's working as it was designed. And our incredible panelists today are the people that I'm turning to that have the vision and the wisdom for what that redesign should be. I am so grateful for you joining us today and for the wisdom of our panelists, and excited to turn it over to Tamara. Tamara Alvarado is our moderator. Tamara is the executive director of the Leo Shortino Family Foundation. Prior to her work at Shortino, she was the executive director of the School of Arts and Culture at the Mexican Heritage Plaza. She's a Stanford graduate. I admire her. I admire you, Tamara. Your wisdom, your grace, the way you lead with authenticity and transparency. You are wonderful, and I thank you for moderating this panel. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Tanis, and thank you for allowing me to work with you individually and with your organization. I really appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, buenos dias. I'm coming at you live from my 7-year-old's room next to the Batmobile and the piñata, serving some San Jose downtown mother realness. So I also come with some of my medicine, which is my humor. So we are definitely having conversation about some really heavy topics. This is a really heavy week, and we have a lot of heavy weeks, you know, and it's important for us to have some acknowledgements. Thank you so much, Tanis, for acknowledging that. So I also acknowledge that I am a guest here, that we are guests here on Ohlone land and many different lands of other nations around us. So I want to make that acknowledgement. And I also want to say those names that are so important for us to say this week and in the many weeks ahead and many years ahead. Have Ahmaud, Aubrey, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. And even in Hayward, we had El Gato, an older man from our community. And so I looked down at my notes and I was thinking about this last night. I said, I've got to write these themes down because I want to make sure I get them out of my mouth and not stuck in my throat. And so I encourage us all, you know, for the next several days and weeks to say those out loud and to take action, whatever that action looks like for you. And if you need help, like I don't actually know what to do, to reach out, you know, to reach out to us maybe on this panel and reach out to some of your friends and reach out to the organizations that you know and you trust. But let us not sit back in complacency. All right, and now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to be doing my role here, my job of moderating the panel. I'm going to introduce the speakers. Okay, y'all, these are some really amazing speakers. Some of you I know really well. Some of you I'm just meeting today. For example, Paula, Julian. Do you want me to say Julian or Julian?
It is originally Julian. Nobody ever gets it, so thank you, Tamara.
Okay, just wanted to check. Paula Julian, she's a senior policy specialist for the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. And you also serve, additionally, you serve the National Indian Resource Center addressing domestic violence, safety for Indian women. You assist with policy analysis and development, technical assistance and training, and development of partnerships to strengthen laws, policies, and responses addressing violence against Native women. Paula has worked with Alaska Native advocates to establish the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center and with Native Hawaiian advocates to form the Poana Ona Waini Pillars of Women, both organizations dedicated to addressing domestic and gender-based violence in the Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian community, respectively. NIWRC is based in Montana. However, Paula, you are coming to us live and direct from?
I live on the La Jolla Indian Reservation, where I'm married into in Southern California. I am Filipina, but I've been working with Indian tribes for the last 30 years.
That's right, thank you. That's Luiseño, no?
Yes.
Okay, that's right. Next, I'm going to introduce a new friend of mine. Hey, new friend, Sonia Titnowski, Chief Executive Officer of the Indian Health Center of Santa Clara Valley. I was so happy to meet you and work with you at our annual sunrise ceremony held at the Mexican Heritage Plaza on the day that many of us don't celebrate on Thanksgiving. So thank you, Sonia, for being present there. You've been the CEO at IHC since 2014, and you hold a Bachelor in Business Management and an MBA in Finance and Management. Sonia is a U.S. Army veteran serving as a U.S. paratrooper. I did not know that, and deployed several times. Thank you for your service. Prior to working with IHC, Sonia served as the CEO of the Lower Elwha Klallam tribe for 8 years. She's proud to work with the IHC team to serve all the members, and you're enjoying finding new and innovative ways to support the community. You also enjoy time with your family, your culture, reading, traveling traditional waters by canoe, and raising money and awareness for autism. Sonia, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, it's just an honor to be here with such amazing women, and nice to meet you, Milan. I hadn't met you before. I think we're going to have a wonderful discussion today, so thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay, moving along. Hold on. Moving along on my computer. Next up, it is a great pleasure to introduce Honorable Judge Catherine Lucero, who of course we're so proud of in our community. She's presiding judge of the Juvenile Court Division for Santa Clara County. She's been a judicial officer for 19.5 years and served in a variety of assignments. She's provided leadership in developing innovative programs such as the Family Treatment Court, Young Women and Girls Initiative, the Juvenile Dual Diagnosis Treatment Court, the Family Wellness Court, and the Domestic Violence and Child Maltreatment Initiative called the Green Book. She is a previous board member of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, the Santa Clara County Domestic Violence Council, and the Santa Clara County Child Abuse Council. She's trained other judges locally and nationally on such issues such as domestic violence, impact of violence on children, race and the child welfare system, trauma-informed court setting, and family drug courts. She published a book with her spare time entitled Family Drug Courts, an Innovation in Transformation in 2012, which outlines the local family wellness court history and collaborative. She's raised 2 daughters and has been married for 29 years. Judge Lucero, would you like to add anything else?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me go back to my. All right, Milan, you're up next. Milan's Executive Director of the African American Community Services Agency. Beyond his start in the impoverished Hunters Point neighborhood of San Francisco and lifting the barrier presented to him as an African American young man, Milan has conversely shaken the community with his resounding presence and has ventured on to become a highly sought after asset within the African American community. For over 15 years, Mr. Milan has diligently served the community in various capacities, which has landed him in innumerable leadership and committee representative appointments since graduating from San Jose State in 2009 with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in communications. Milan is the voice of triumph for those who are often left unheard while facing defeat. People living with disabilities, students, seniors, and the very least of them appreciate the once young boy who made a decision to heed his grandmother's words of wisdom, not knowing that years later, those same words would be what has single-handedly changed his life as he continues to pay it forward. Milan, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I'm happy to be here. Thank you all for having me, and I look forward to a wonderful panel discussion. Thank
you, Milan. And Milan, I wouldn't be your friend if I didn't also add that I know that you are very, very active in Greek fraternity culture and community and networks with your fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi.
Yes, I am a active member and a chapter advisor of some wonderful undergraduates at San Jose State University.
Yeah, and I bring that up, Milan, because it's also so much about service. So thank you for your service there as well.
Thank you.
All righty. All right, we're going to get into this. Okay, so here's the thing, right? We're going to do this. We're going to have this discussion. There's parts to the discussion. We are going to frame the discussion. We're going to reclaim the narrative, and then we're going to talk about oneness and intersectionality of the work. So those are the three chunks. All right. So if you're following along at home or wherever you are in the Zoomerverse, that's what we're going to do. And in advance, I'm going to ask for your patience as I kind of toggle back and forth between screens here on my one screen and get into it. So one of the framing questions that we've been thinking about as a group and individually with Leilani, who's been so helpful and so wonderful in working with us individually as moderator and panelists, is around where should the spotlight be in order for us to move forward as a community, responsively, intentionally, and strategically. There is so much going on in the world. There is so much going on in our local community. But one of the words that I kept thinking about in the last several nights, and especially last night when I was having that very normal reaction of nervousness and will this be something that I can do? And the word that popped up for me was solidarity, right? That one of the most powerful things we can do right now is be in solidarity, even though it's in Zoom. And those of us coming from different ethnic specific communities, but coming together to have this conversation. Anyway, so I'm not a panelist, I'm moderating. Let me turn to you, Paula, first, if you don't mind. And I want to ask you if you could speak further as to what you've seen from inside reservations and expand the worst of both worlds. I have a couple questions here, right? What do systems of relief inside reservations look like? How has COVID exacerbated issues experienced by Native peoples? Just for starters. And then, Sonia, I'm going to come to you next, okay? And then Milan. Paula, do you mind kicking us off?
Sure. So I think one of the things that NIWRC has been saying for the last several months around COVID is that tribal communities, because of colonization and genocide, have experienced disparities across health, social, economic, educational, at the highest numbers. And what COVID has done has really turned a high beam on those disparities, further showing that these disparities are even further going to harm Native peoples and tribes. So that's sort of overall in response to that question. In terms of what systems and responses look like with tribal nations, similar to what it looks like for the federal government and state governments, tribal governments as the third sovereign of these lands, it differs from community to community. So there's not one consistent, other than the colonization by federal and state governments. Each tribe, each nation has their differences and uniqueness, given their languages, their teachings, and their customs. So that's, I think those were those all your questions?
I have so many questions, right? Well, that's,
That,
I think that's good for now, like, unless you'd like to add a little bit more.
I think in terms of, I'm just trying to read through my notes. In terms of the difference, and I don't know if this is your next question in terms of the spotlight. Is that the next question?
Right, so I had asked a little bit about what does systems of relief look like inside reservations? And I want to recognize that there are Native communities both on reservations and not. And that often we have, stereotypes or preconceived ideas of where Native people are.
Right. So thank you for that. And I think specific to California, California has a very large, I think one of the larger populations of Native people living off of their lands, away from their homelands. But in terms of how many federally recognized tribes there are in California, we have 109. And they're not all reservations. So I think it's really important for people to take the time to learn about who the Native people are in their area. Because in California, you have reservations, you have rancherias, and then you have the urban Indian populations. And that's different in California versus Alaska or Hawaii or Arizona. And it's really important for people to really understand that history, because I think oftentimes it's the history. You have Supreme Court justices who make very harmful decisions, harmful decisions for Indian tribes and Native people because they never learned that history of Indigenous peoples on these lands, and they never understood what the United States and other foreign governments did to Indigenous peoples who called these their homelands first. So I think that's really important for people to take the time to do that. I know that the states of Washington and Montana, I believe, are the only two states I'm aware of that have passed state laws requiring that education be incorporated in schools. I think we need to do more of that across the country. 2 states out of 50 states is unacceptable, and that's why you have people in policy positions and lawmakers at the local, state, and federal level who don't understand that Indigenous peoples are peoples with a political status, unlike any other people on these lands.
Thank you, Paula. I really appreciate that. I think that's having grown up in Escondido, California, and surrounded by the local Native. I grew up understanding that there were living Native peoples around and living in my community. So it was not something that I thought was different. And then having to experience people who didn't understand that actually Native peoples are living peoples, that they're not in dioramas in these history museums. I love museums. That's no shade against the history museums. But thank you, Paula, for that information and perspective. Sonia, I'm going to come to you. And can you talk a little bit about what it's been like delivering services to your clients and the work that you've been doing on a local level in and around Santa Clara County? How has this experience been for you and your organization?
Thank you, Tamara. I just wanted to add just a little bit of a comment to follow up from what Paula said. I really appreciated her comment about the relocation sites. Our organization is an Urban Indian Health Center, which was created because Native peoples here in, not just in California, there's 43 of us throughout the US, was created to get healthcare to the Native communities because of that Relocation Act and getting us in these different cities and urban centers. And so that's a little bit about why our center was created. In response to the COVID-19 work that we've been doing, fortunately for us, we've been able to provide testing at our facilities. So we can, we also have a drive-up testing process where people can come and receive services from us. So if there are any American Indian or Alaska Natives who don't have health coverage, if they don't have a primary care provider, they can come and see us. It has been a challenge though, because personal protective equipment, and if you've heard that on the news, you've heard it everywhere, that the need associated with that equipment was critical in the beginning. Fortunately, we've been able to, we were able to ramp up so quickly and get a supply together to continue to provide services for our community and for our patients. Right now, Indian Health Center provides support and medical, dental, and behavioral health services to 23,000 patients here in San Jose, Santa Clara Valley, really Santa Clara County, actually. But one of the things that's been unique about this situation is we've been able to, and it's really just building off Paula, been able to highlight the gaps in care, those being some of the social services that we have not been able to provide historically. But for us as a facility, we've actually provided care baskets, including supplies to sustain our community members, and not just our elders, but multi-generational family in their facilities because of the lack of resources available to them, especially in the beginning of this crisis, this pandemic, because there wasn't a solid system in place. And it just, again, highlighted the fact that without a lot of work and advocacy, the Native community was left out of the conversation in trying to get those supplies and services and support to our communities. I hope that covers what you were looking for. If there's any follow-up questions, feel free to let me know.
Okay, thank you, Sonia. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you also creating that connection to what, and responding to what Paula was talking about. And that's absolutely fine and great between us all here, which is, you know, it's interesting always to be on these Zoom calls where we can't see our audience, but, you know, shout out to our audience, trying to feel that connection to you all. And appreciate that everybody is spending their morning doing, having this conversation and learning from each other with us. So thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Milan, I'm going to come to you next. And I'm wondering, Milan, if you can expand on okay, so we want to talk about distrust in this question for you, and expand and asking you to expand a bit, because I know that this is a whole thing about expanding on historical context of distrust. As a follow-up, what are some issues that may have gone unnoticed, and how has COVID brought systemic injustices to light from your perspective?
Thank you for the question. I think this is deeply rooted in, even if you look at the narrative of Africans coming over to America, if you research us, it says slaves were brought over, which first of all, the narrative is incorrect. There were kings and queens that were stolen from a country and brought somewhere that we did not ask to come to. And as a young man currently, I cannot tell you where in Africa my ancestors come from. So looking at the Atlantic slave trade with 12 million being stolen and 10.5 million actually making it to America, which we built into the economy of the American society, but yet 2020, we're still fighting for equal rights, equal justice, and all of these things to be equal. Again, 400 years, right? The New York Times right now is celebrating or recognizing 1619 Project and the 400 years of just really investing and researching the impacts of the Black community in America, and yet and still we are only 56 years away from when we were talking about the Voting Rights Act, marriage inequality in America. I'm 38, so that means that we are still dealing with a lot of layers of African American and Black people and African ancestry experience in the country. So distrust comes in when we talk about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment on African Americans. When we talk about 98% of Black women that voted in the Alabama, I believe it was, election, then people started flocking to Black women if we can just pander them and talk to them about voting. So I think that for our community, distrust comes from so much, the Jim Crow era, the civil rights laws, and still to today having to fight these same issues that my grandmother, who I talk to every night, had mentioned to me. She said, Black people are still getting the short end of the deal. And when you look at society, it would look like to your face, right? I have on a suit, we're all on Zoom communicating, but oftentimes Black people are still left out of housing, getting what we need. In the social service industry, African Americans are on the front lines in many of these jobs. And so when we talk about COVID-19 and what it has revealed to us with the Black and brown communities is we're on the front lines. We were not a part of the narration of getting PPE to workers at McDonald's, workers in janitorial services. And so when we again uncover what the mistrust and distrust is, as I said to one of my undergraduates that I just recently was talking about, Kappa Alpha Psi, I said, young Black man, you are not invisible. Like, this disease still sees you, and I see you as your advisor. So I advise you to put on your mask. I advise you to put on your gloves but then when he talks about what he's learned in African American studies at San Jose State, he uncovers all of this distrust that he has learned from his grandparents about American society. So I think unpacking 400 years is going to be a little difficult for me, but I hope that I'm able to educate someone to go do research, further research about our communities and seeing how it still shows up in American society today.
Thank you, Milan. Do the research. I'm just going to say that again for all of us. Do the research.
And take a class.
Take a class.
Take African American studies. There's all these studies that, I took African American studies at San Jose State University because I needed to learn more about who I was and what part of my community that I didn't know about. I didn't learn about Juneteenth until I got to college. And so I think learning about other cultures and how America's tapestry isn't even America's. So it's made up of different parts of the world all in one.
Thank you, Milan. And now that everything is online, we can really go take that class because you don't even have to buy the parking permit anymore. Okay, so Milan, I'm gonna come back to you just shortly, but thank you. Thank you for that and for that reminder and for that homework assignment of take a class, read a book. There is a lot of information online and you have a lot of trusted people in this community that you can, as audience members, that you can reach out to. And that, if you reach out to me, for example, and I don't know, I'll ask somebody else and we can know together. Next part is the part that I promised on. Remember I said there's 3 parts. Second part is reclaiming the narrative. And a bit of just brief commentary. Even though it's not you, oppressive systems are sustained through racism. It is time to ask why. We've all been asking why, especially, many of us been asking why for a while, but the pandemic has definitely, we have new people asking the question, so that's good. Come on in. There is a need for internal work to rebuild strategic system solutions for healthcare, for housing, education, employment. So for everyone on the panel to just kind of think about, how does race impact the work and what does this tell us about race? Milan, I am going to ask you, and we've talked about this, about some of the misconceptions in terms of the African-American community, the African community, and we have this conversation around the diversity within the community. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I think when we talk about the term Black, African-American, African ancestry, of course, once again, in white supremacy and the development of the country, cultures were given titles and names. Like we were first called Negroes, and you name the name, it was created in some type of system. Oftentimes when African Americans are going to institutions for support and help, they're asked, what do you identify as? And African ancestry actually encompasses all those who come from the diaspora of one of the 54 countries in Africa. Africa is not just one country, but it's comprised of 54. And you typically, even providers should ask, you know, when they see someone who might have a skin tone that would be considered Black, to ask them, how do you identify? Because you can even cause a pause in someone when you say they're Black and you didn't even ask them. And so oftentimes what we tell people in the education of understanding how race and culture is designed is not to assume someone is just Black because they look Black. You need to ask them, because they might tell you, I'm from Ethiopia, I'm from wherever that place is, Mississippi. Like, they will tell you their identification. And so I think in the education about it is one to ask a question first rather than assume.
Okay, thank you, Mom. I know we've been asking you. I've asked you a couple of questions now. All right, I'm going to move over to you, Judge Lucero. I wanted to ask you, what does it mean? What does that mean for you, reclaiming the narrative? And could you talk to us a little bit more on the true COVID consequences for education, for youth and communities of color, from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I think the reclaiming the narrative is a great approach. And I think that means us being truth tellers, speaking truth to power, making sure that we do have data to support our work and our concerns and our policy agendas. You know, very, very simply, I think we need to remember that she who shows up writes history, and that we do need to commit our stories to some sort of documentation so that we're not documented in the eyes of the majority. In that regard, I just need to let you know, my mother, who was one of 8 children, a farm worker, is writing her life story for her 11 grandchildren. My life's work has been to empower Latinas, specifically my daughters, and in that way, we are making our own narrative. So I want us to remember our individual power, and that it starts in our homes, and it starts with ourselves. You know, I can't be a messenger for hope if I'm strung out or stressed or unavailable because I'm too distracted. The true impact of COVID-19 that I'm seeing from the court is that, you know, already we all know, baseline, families of color, communities of color are overrepresented in our justice systems. So that was a baseline. The highlight with COVID-19 and with our youth is that everybody went to remote learning. Now, a youth who is incarcerated already loses 3 months of an educational life. Okay, just that's off the top. That's documented. They get behind 3 months every time they get into custody. But now we have kids that are supposed to be remote learning. And the kids in custody, we have reduced our population by 40% since March 14th, the shelter in place date. But we still have youth in custody, and they have all kinds of hardware and software and capabilities. But once they're released and we want them home, they don't have access to internet. They don't have access to hardware, computers. Not only that, our youth are living in very crowded conditions if they're fortunate enough to have shelter. I had a young lady yesterday who said, you know, my mom is renting out every room in the house and I don't have a place to be. That is not uncommon. I've had young people tell me that they, you know, I'll ask them where their space is in the house. I don't even ask anymore if they have a bedroom, because that's assuming so much. So I'll ask them if they have a space, and sometimes they have a bedroll in the kitchen. So the impact to our youth is further highlighted because we want them home, but home is not necessarily a place where they're going to be able to do remote education. And I think we really need to step up and make sure that in that case, we need to have a plan that helps them catch up when we get, whatever our new normal will be. So those are some of the things I'm seeing. So it's highlighting housing insecurity, food insecurity, educational disparities, and income inequality in a new and different way. And I did want to mention, because Milan had mentioned where he started with his fire in his belly. And yeah, I took Chicano studies in the 80s, early 80s, and then women's studies. I didn't even know what I didn't know, right? We get to drink from the fountain of knowledge when we get into these higher institutions, but today we can just get online and start reading. I read read The City of Inmates. This is a great book. Does this come out backwards, or can you see it in? Okay, so
yeah, it's okay.
Okay, City of Inmates. It's by Kelly Little Hernandez, and it's the documentation of the caging of people in California. So it's kind of a Jim Crow kind of documentation, only it's for Latinos and natives. And this is an excellent book because I'll get to talk about it later, but my campaign is to end the incarceration of young women and girls in Santa Clara County. And so understanding the history of that, which she spells out, is phenomenal. And we can do different if we know what our history tells us. But again, she who shows up writes history, so we all need to keep showing up. Thanks.
Thank you, Judge Lucero. She who shows up gets to write history. And also want to say that I recall 20 years ago going into juvenile hall to visit some of my students from the Washington neighborhood from when I was at Washington United Youth Center. And then recently, 20 years later, going back to the hall to visit with a program as a funder, and seeing how greatly reduced the number of young women in juvenile hall has been over the last 20 years. I don't have the data, but I saw, that I remember walking into juvenile hall and seeing multiple pods full of young girls, mostly Latinas, and then walking into the hall several months ago and seeing one pod and being able to sit with the girls in that program. So thank you for your work and for being a leader, in our community. All right, awkwardly moving along. Okay, so Sonia and Paula. Paula, I'm going to ask you about this under this, sort of part of the conversation around reclaiming the narrative. Obviously, Paula, there is within our communities, we are interested in hearing from you and your work with missing, murdered Indigenous women and fighting against this fabricated narrative. Want to ask you about that, ask you about the question, reclaiming the narrative, with that filter in place. And then Sonia, I'll ask you the same question, but from your perspective. So Paula, would you mind?
Sure.
Yeah, there you are.
Okay, so I really appreciate Judge Lucero's comments about speaking our truths. So NIWRC puts out a magazine 3 times a year, and this magazine called Restoration is available on our website. And we also ask people to support us and subscribe. But this magazine, for the last, let's see, we've been publishing since 2003, I think does exactly what Judge Lucero talks about, speaks our truth from our experiences, our voices, our language. And it really, around missing and murdered, it's really important that we point out and educate that even though the national attention on missing and murdered has been happening since 2017. The reality is we have had missing and murdered Indigenous women since contact. And you can see that in historical documents from various government documents. There's an 1867 called Doolittle Commission report. I think it was a senator at that time, Senator Doolittle. I think it was James Doolittle, but he was commissioned to do this report on the conditions of Indian tribes. And in that report from 1867, it might as well be the same tribal leaders speaking today about how their women are being missing and murdered. So the voices of tribal leadership and Native women from 1867 are the same exact concerns from today. There is no difference. And so there are so many breadcrumbs throughout history. The first case of trafficking of a Native woman was from 1825, and it's documented. It was from Hawaii, and it was documented because the Native Hawaiian leaders issued what's called a kapu. And a kapu is it's like an edict, or you could say it was a law or a resolution that forbade Native women from boarding these whaling ships, foreign whaling ships. And what was happening was the captains of these foreign whaling ships were attempting to pay families for women that would service the men on the ships. And basically it was trafficking. So when Milan was talking about all of the African people who were stolen from their lands, that's trafficking. Let's call it what it is. We have a scholar, Sarah Deer, who provided testimony before the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs in 2011. And at that testimony, she basically said, if the Trafficking Victims Protection Act had been on the books in 1776, the United States would be charged as a trafficker. For all of the individuals, Native, African, all of the other individuals that they trafficked onto these lands and in other countries. So I think it's really important in terms of reclaiming our narrative. These issues that our people face across communities of color and tribal and Native communities are not new issues. These are issues that have been challenges since contact. And we are now doing better to organize and unite and stand in alliance with each other and demand that there be a different way of responding to ensure that our people don't continue to suffer these disparities that they do. They're preventable. We don't need to have any other Native woman go missing or murdered any further. But sometimes we say there's not the political will to make the change. And I think it's the grassroots organizing and all of the grassroots movement, Black Lives Matter, missing and murdered Indian women and girls, that are going to force our governments to be held accountable. And they can be.
They can be held accountable, yes.
Yes. It can be. The United States, people don't realize the United States apologized in 1993 to Native Hawaiians in law, and in 2009 they apologized to American Indians. And people don't realize that, and it's doing the homework to see, okay, they apologized. It wasn't the greatest apology, but they apologized. Now, how do we move forward with the reconciliation and the healing that needs to happen?
Thank you, Paula. Sonia, I'm going to turn to you. Would you like to add some thoughts to this?
Sure. Thank you, Paula, for that wonderful description. And it's hard to follow that, but I did want to share, I also come from my reservation. I'm a Makah tribal member, and just a few years ago, my cousin came up missing, and then we found her in a compromised position, and she was gone. We lost her. And if it wasn't for our family being able to advocate and speak our truth and make sure that they understood exactly what was happening to our women. So it's still happening today. Our young women are being removed from our reservations and from our lands. It's harder even in an urban setting. We found it here in our own community because there's so much opportunity, and the constant statement of, oh, they just ran away. That is not an acceptable statement anymore. Hasn't been ever, but even more so now, because the the light that's been shined on this particular issue really just goes to the fact that people have accepted this as a reasonable loss. They haven't really put enough energy into finding our sisters, our cousins, our grandmothers even, who were lost when they were young, shouldn't have been, because they were removed from their families or from their reservations. And it's really, really unfortunate. And in relocation, because many of our folks wanted to go back home, we lost many during that time as well. So they were forced to these urban settings, and then they tried to return home and never made it, right? So we know that's also a problem. I also wanted to thank Judge Lucero for bringing up the conversation around policy and making sure that we're paying attention to our youth. And I also wanted to reiterate around the fact that you're right, even in today's society, so many of the community members don't have the ability to have internet, have cell phones, have this way of communicating with each other that's required at this moment in time. Again, this is a fleeting moment in time, but we have to support our community members as we're trying to get them through it safely and soundly. And the increase around this only, again, highlights the fact that the most recent study from the Urban Indian Health Institute around missing and murdered Indigenous women also shows that the police force doesn't take these losses from families. They don't do very long investigations. We've also found that coroners don't identify the race of the people that are Jane Does or John Does, because they automatically default to white. And that is something that was highlighted, and I continue to talk about that training for the coroners, because in many cases there's only one coroner for the county or one coroner for 3 counties. So if we don't educate them about how to identify our lost community members accurately, then the families will never find them. So there's many, many challenges with this process, and some of which are judicial, some are policy, some are advocacy, and some are legislative. And so there's all these areas where we can speak that truth and say, no, this is no longer acceptable to us. We have to find a new way to do this work and make sure people are paying attention at every level, not just at one level or another, because it doesn't close the gap. It doesn't close that communication gap that continues on from generation to generation. So it's not just our generation. Like Paula shared earlier, it's been happening for centuries now. So yeah. Thank you.
It's contact. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you for bringing that perspective into the room. And I also want to acknowledge again that, you know, a lot of the topics that we're talking about are difficult, and that I encourage us to, you know, drink some water. Afterwards, you know, go outside. You know, take some time to walk around, you know, smell something that's good, you know, maybe burn some sage, or some copal, or drink some tea, because it's painful. You know, it's painful to talk about these topics, but also we have to talk about them. It is our responsibility. And I really want to thank the Y for making space like this and making sure that we have the time, and that this will be recorded and it can be shared again. And that we have resources that we're mentioning that we will, I'm sure, you know, maybe put together like a little sheet that can be sent out in the follow-up email. I'm not trying to tell the staff what to do, but you know how I am, I'm bossy. So Milan, before I forget, I wanted to do a little follow-up with you. Is there, just wanted to give you the opportunity to correct, was there anything else you wanted to add in terms of misconceptions that you want to correct as related to COVID impact on the African-American, African ancestry community? Which, by the way, that's a new one for me. That's a new phrase, the African ancestry piece. So I'm going to have to do my homework and read up on that. You don't need to tell me right now.
In regards to, the mental health dangers within those who are on the front line, and looking at, although we're talking about healthcare workers, particularly those who are African American, are really experiencing the COVID-19 impact. Just recently, we received some funding to house college students, and most of them were Black, who said, "I can't go home. My parents are older. And my mother is in healthcare, so she's battling two things. For me to come home, I don't want to risk my mother catching this. So I have nowhere to go. I have to move out of the university's housing on this date." And so luckily we received funding at that time from Destination Home and Chuck and Paige Robbins to house, we've housed over 15 individuals, families, but it was the students that really shocked me because they were going to sleep in their cars. And I said, we're not, having that. And so speaking about COVID-19, it's having these impacts on the frontline workers, which are, in our hospitals, and the mental health that they're experiencing is more, again, back traumatizing the culture, traumatizing these individuals. And so the misconception can just look like the elderly population and the young people aren't getting it. But when you, again, pull back the layers again of how race and culture play a role, and as we saw, right, athletes who are making enormous amounts of money were getting tested immediately. And until people started speaking out about that, the everyday workforce and those who are homeless within Silicon Valley, right, a top tier community, actually has so many people who are being affected that we were not discussing or talking about. But now that we are, we want to remove those misconceptions and understand that the community needs to reach out to their community-based nonprofits that are doing the work on the ground. I reached out to one of our community-based food facilities to help us increase the need, right? In downtown San Jose, where we're located, serving Santa Clara County, our intake rate went up completely. I took it upon myself as a young leader to go to the store every morning at 7 a.m. to shop to feed over 388 families a week, just because the amount was so wide. So we shouldn't assume that community-based nonprofits do not need our help. We should not assume that community nonprofits of color do not need our help. In fact, we probably need to recognize we need those more now than ever. And we need the investments of dollars and the investments of people speaking up for us at tables that we, those who look like me, do not sit at. So I want to make sure that we remove that blanket and address that immediately.
Thank you, Milan. I really appreciate that, especially shining a light on our college students. I know that you individually and that ASA has a really special relationship to the African American student population, especially at San Jose State. And I thank you for that, and our community thanks you for that, because these are the kinds of nuances that nonprofits that have relationships with community can bring to the forefront and to shine a light on, and to say, hey, here's a community that you're not thinking about. These are young people. These are going to be our leaders. So thank you for that.
And are eliminating what we oftentimes hear is, well, it's not that many of them. So should they get the grant? Oh, how about we give it to a larger nonprofit that serves their population, which is okay too, because they are serving. But I've sat at tables where I've heard people and I had to speak up and say, you do know there is a nonprofit that's focusing in, that's tirelessly doing this work with no funding. And so we need to check people at the table when they're making these financial decisions on when to give out funding. Or of course, in my olive branch and my connection to various communities, people like you have sat at those tables and said, have you reached out to UGMA? Have you reached out to the African American Community Service Agency? And we serve, definitely we have an emphasis on the Black community, but we serve a large population of the Latino community, immigrants, those who are just hidden into society and the rivers within San Jose and Santa Clara County. So again, it's a lot to unpack, but we can do it together.
Well, I feel like you and I have a whole nother webinar, Zoom thing about that, about showing solidarity between different communities. Or maybe we just need to have the Y have us all on another one, just, drilling down on showing solidarity between communities of color, because so often conversations are really in response to white people. right? Like, oh, it's the African American community, we're going to talk to white people. Oh, it's the Latinos, we're going to talk to white people. Oh, it's Native communities, we're going to talk to white people. And I know a lot of my work has been, and our collective work has been around, let's have those conversations with each other. And for example, in our community, really fighting against bias and racism, anti-Blackness, you know, in our community. And we get to know how to do solidarity. We get to do that. So anyways, I'm going.
And just to note on that, so people don't get it confused, I was just sharing with somebody the other day because we have put in the agency an image. It's an image that an artist wanted to do with the agency, and so it's of a Black woman and a panther. I'll just give you a little on that. And the person was like, are people going to feel uncomfortable? And when it comes to what COVID-19 is doing, is re-exposing the roots of racism in America, inequality and everything. Oftentimes, we even in our own cultures are battling internal issues that we're working out, and we're educating other people, we're educating ourselves. So I always say to people, don't be afraid to ask to get clarification on communities of color, but we are actually not your teachers. We are sharing with you because it can, you know, I have to put on every day a lot of energy of my ancestors. I think it was Maya Angelou saying that I show up as one, but I'm here as 10,000. She was speaking of the spirit of my ancestors. And when these killings are happening in my community, every day I'm like, okay, if I don't have on my suit, you know, are they going to look at me differently? Are they going to treat me differently? Look at me a certain way? And so I think, again, COVID-19 is once again reopening and showing that the wound America has enacted against so many communities, and particularly the Black community I'm speaking for today, is still painful. You know, it's painful. Even right now, I'm getting emotional just thinking about what my ancestors survived. And to today, I am still fighting some of their battles that never were addressed by those in power, those of privilege who sit at these tables. So that is a whole nother conversation.
And everyone's invited. Okay, why we got conversations lined up for a while. I know you do already, but okay. So one of my strengths is not being succinct. So here we go. Last part of the conversation or section is around oneness, intersectionality of the work. And this is when we get to the strategizing part, right? Which again, you know, this is not the one-stop shop. You're not gonna, you know, walk away with the full playbook. We get to continuously develop that together. But that broad question of who gets to do the strategizing, how can we ensure community voices are heard? How do we amplify community voice? Who are the stakeholders that we should be calling? Who are we writing to? Judge Lucero, I'm gonna start with you, and then I'm gonna, you know, come over to you, Sonia, and then Milan, Paula. And so Judge Lucero, maybe you can talk a little bit on the role of leadership and some of the barriers there, and how can we change for communities of color, right? What do we face while trying to get a seat at the table? But then this is also around strategy. How can we change systems within? Could you speak to that?
Yeah. So, and if I miss something, just remind me. But so I guess the main thing I want to talk about is the urgency of the work. That while we strategize and plan and figure it out, people's lives are at stake and their freedom is at stake. And that's what I get every day when I'm in what I would call an ER room, but it's a courtroom. And I'm, you know, making decisions about how to, you know, I have two roles as a juvenile court judge. One is public safety, and one is best interest of the youth. So I feel very blessed to be able to weigh those things, because that's a lot. I can look at the best interest of the youth. And of course, public safety is paramount, and this is the dual analysis. But what I want to tell you is that the work is urgent, and to begin to dismantle the pipeline to prison, we need to look at the work of Tia Martinez, who's out of Stanford. And she has an agency that does all the research that we would ever need to understand how the disadvantage begins at the cradle. I want us to be able to look at that very holistically if we're truly going to strategize, because by the time I get a case, Tamara, I'm doing triage. I can do my best to try to heal. I can do my best to try to bring in services. But really what we need to do is go upstream. And there's the old saying about, you know, if you want to know why you're pulling all, you know, there was an African village, there was a stream, there was somebody kept pulling out the babies, you know, seeing babies in the stream, pulling babies out, you know, drying them off, making sure they were fine. But he said, we need to find out who's throwing these babies in the stream in the first place. So they went up the river and they found the culprit and they, you know, got rid of them. And then there was no more babies being thrown in the stream. And I want to know, I want to go up the river, and I want to make sure that we are getting quality prenatal care to our mothers, that we are making sure that the access to health care allows them to have what they need when they give birth and when they go home, and mental health and housing, and 0 to 3, you know, that time when their brains are a sponge. And even before that, make sure that they were born free of nicotine and alcohol and anything else that maybe we needed to address at the, you know, really, you know, upstream, without, you know, stigmatizing or pathologizing, because we're just humans. You know, we just need to get the information to people so they can make good choices. Everybody wants their children to be healthy, not just me. Everybody wants that. And then we need to look at early childhood education, opportunities for that, childcare, and then school-aged children, and the children making sure they have what they need. So it's a life course, and the mapping has been done, and we need to really grab onto that and start owning that mission. And to me, that means we need to actually analyze which zip codes are not allowing kids to be on a successful life course, and then tackle each neighborhood. It's not, I know it sounds daunting, but it really isn't, because we know we have the information. We know what we need to do. We need to just make sure that, you know, it's more than Tia Martinez and myself. You know, there's a lot of people in Santa Clara County. I don't know if you know about the data book. It's called the Santa Clara County Children's Data Book. Dana Bunnett's group, Kids in Common, just put that out. It's on the internet. These issues are being micro-examined right now. And we're so lucky to live in Santa Clara County that with a county executive, Dr. Smith, who definitely, his mission, and he said it out loud, is to eliminate the impact and the disparities of the children that we bring into the child welfare system, the kids of color, and the disparities that we bring into the juvenile justice system. So I think we're better off than we used to be. And you'll see if you look at the data book, the negative impacts are dropping. But we need to start dismantling that, and we have a recipe. And so I would invite us to talk about that whenever we can, wherever we can. That's working within systems with data and research. And I do my best as a Superior Court judge. But again, let's remember that I see the case really late, and we all need to get together on that upstream solution.
Thank you, Judge Lucero. I think that the conversations that are happening at the city and the county around equity, that it's incredibly important. Like you said, we've got the data, we have the information, we know which zip codes, we know which communities, we know that it's communities of color. So then there's the piece around political will, right? And getting the people who are voting to vote with equity in mind, and not necessarily with with where are they going next. Getting a little spicy. Okay, that's another webinar. Maybe not for the why, but another thing. Sonia, Milan, maybe some comments here on the next question that I'm charged to ask is really about liberation. You know, and when I think about strategy, I think about liberation, and sometimes people, when I talk about liberation, or when we collectively talk about liberation, sometimes people kind of roll their eyes occasionally, or just kind of go like, like that seems so utopia. But what are we doing all this for then, right? So I want to just kind of, Sonia, for you first to kind of think about the strategy piece next to the word liberation.
Sure. When I think about the way in which we're choosing our leaders, there continues to be a challenge. Getting out the vote is one way, just like you had already mentioned, and completing our census so that we make sure that we continue to be counted. And because that too this year was a fight. I don't know if people know that. They originally wanted to eliminate the American Indian and Alaska Native category because they say that we're not statistically relevant anymore. So I just want you all to sit on that for just a second. When the federal government has a trust responsibility to each and every one of us, and they need to know where we are, how many there are, and be able to provide the services that support that. So going back to that sovereignty issue, I continue to struggle with the way that the systems have set themselves up to basically eliminate us from the conversation. So when we're not at the table, we're on the menu. And so let's not forget about the fact that you had mentioned it 3 or 4 times now, that we have to have a voice, a strong enough voice that says, wait a minute, we're still here and we still count. And that goes for all people of color, not just the Native American community, because throughout this time, we've been each singled out. That's why we're here having this conversation today, is each one of our communities have been singled out and targeted for that elimination process, whether it's through incarceration, whether it's through, I want to use the right word. I'm sorry, Paula, if I don't use it, but you had mentioned it earlier about, I'm just gonna skip that part. Sorry, I wanted to tie that in, but I can't remember the word. But when choosing a leader, we always keep in mind that humility provides clarity, where arrogance makes a cloud. The last thing we wanted was to be able to be led by someone whose judgment and actions were clouded by arrogance. And that's the time in which we're living in today. There's so much arrogance clouding what really needs to be done to support our collective communities. We have to have a united voice. We have to address these inequities and address this targeted behavior against all of our communities. We're sort of in this together, and if we don't continue to stand up and say, that's enough, we're not going to take it, they will win ultimately. And we've seen the ramifications of that for the last 4 years, unfortunately. And so working within our systems, advocating for systems, supporting what we need to do to stand together and to get the right people in the right positions to help move our initiatives forward to protect our respective communities. To me, that's where the inequity lies, in making sure that we're still there and we're participating actively and engaging collectively in solutions around these issues. Thank you.
Sonia, thank you. And thank you for your work in DC. I know that you're there and that work isn't seen because it's far. And I know that, doing that work in DC to make sure that Native peoples are not deemed statistically irrelevant is incredibly important. I know you've been at that for a long time and that you're very much a recognized and respected person in that world. And so we thank you for that as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that recognition. It is a long journey, but like Milan said earlier, sometimes you have to put the suit on that says, I'm here representing more than myself, more than even just my small community, because we need a little bit of that suit of armor and that warrior spirit that was passed down to us from our ancestors to say, you're strong enough to do this. Don't be afraid to be at the table and share your concerns. And that's really all I try to do, is just share concerns that I'm hearing from my community that says, this is not okay with me. the work around the Native veterans issues has also been a personal passion of mine, and just make sure that they've served their country, and yet the percentage of Native veterans who are homeless is staggering.
Yeah.
Staggering. We've been serving and protecting this country for so many years, and yet we still don't get that one recognition necessarily, and nobody really needs that, but it's the support. That's what we're supposed to be receiving. And it wasn't just until this year, through a lot of advocacy, that we were actually able to say it's okay for a Native veteran to go to a Native facility. And that's only temporarily. Through this COVID-19 legislation, they've now said, oh, it's okay if that veteran goes to your facility now. I'm like, okay, for how long? Oh, for 3 months. Well, these challenges they're facing go beyond that. These are lifelong challenges. We want to be able to support them. Sorry, that's my own tangent on that issue, but it continues to be a challenge because Native people and really people of color want to go where they're comfortable, right? Yeah. They want to seek out support with people who are there to actually support them and appreciate what they bring to our communities, and not just say, oh, it's just one more person dragging on the system. I've actually heard that. It has made my heart stop for a moment, but it's frustrating right now in these conversations to know that people think of us in that way. All of us, all of our communities, not just the Native community.
Sonia, no, there's, I don't accept your apology for going on. This is not a tangent. This is important information for us to have, because this is not the work that we do. It's not, I don't want to make it generic. It has to be specific in order for us to serve better. And I think that, you know, raise your hand if you've put on a suit to go do advocacy in DC on the panel. Like, yeah, we've all, you know, I may not be wearing a suit right now. I'm actually wearing my Somos Mayfair Challenge the System t-shirt. Shout out to Somos Mayfair.
Oh, awesome.
And I know that that's what we do, right? We warrior up and we put on our shields and our medicine.
Yes.
Milan, did you want to comment on the two words together, strategy and liberation? You know, something light.
Yes. I'm just inspired by James Weldon Johnson, who said, lift every voice and sing. I think in regards to liberation, when I went to Australia by way of the Knight Foundation, and I recognized the Knight Foundation, sent us there to learn some things about what Australians are doing down under. But one of the things that they did pass is a law in Australia to recognize the Native people before government does anything. They recognize that the land that they are on does not belong to them, it did not, and how it was stolen. And then they talk about the business of what's going on. I think America can make some changes in liberation by recognizing whose land we are all on and recognizing the people that were stolen and brought here. In regards to liberation, I mean, recognizing white people to recognize that they can walk in their power and recognizing their privilege and standing up and saying that this is not okay, and what white people can do in regards to the racism that is going on in America, changing policies and procedures that are impacting us and inviting all of us to those tables that we're missing at. I'm also not boxing us in, you know, only calling on me when it's dealing with Black issues, calling me when we're dealing with other issues, and inviting me onto news stations only when, you know, movies like Black Panther come out. They'll call and say, well, let's call. These are things that we need to move beyond when we talk about issues in the media as well. Making sure that we encourage Black brothers and sisters to vote and participate in the census, mentoring young people and encouraging them when we see them, smiling at them and letting them know that you're going to make sure that they feel safe in the environments that they come in. Also, if you see a Black business, several Black businesses, Black hair shops, Black businesses are not getting the PPP that we see major industries have been able to get $22 million worth of funding, but when we go down the street, we're noticing that some of these businesses are not. So if you see a Black business in your neighborhood, stop by to see if they are, as we continue to open up, checking in on what Black businesses are in your community. Eviction prevention, making sure that we're supporting and talking with our local officials about that, because guess who's getting evicted? your Black and your brown families that are living in low to moderate income housing, and definitely supporting HR 40 of the 116th Congress regarding the commission to study and develop reparation proposal for African Americans and paying back my ancestors for all that free work that was done to build America. I want to make sure that we get some support, and also supporting and making sure that Flint, Michigan still gets clean water, because today they still do not have clean water. Those are my quick points.
Thank you, Milan. I really appreciate that. And quickly, if you do not know of a Black-owned business, feel no shame, but feel shame if you don't ask. So you can also send me a message later if you don't know of any Black-owned businesses, because there are so many and they are so great. So don't call Milan, call me. Okay, Paula, strategy, liberation.
See, I feel like it's such a huge ask, but I think what comes to mind, and I really appreciate Judge Lucero, Milan, and Sonia. This has been such an awesome conversation, and I hope that we can stay connected. But on the last question, what comes to mind are many things. What comes to mind is the importance of having conversations. We call them at NIWRC, we call them conversations with the field, but what they really are conversations around our dining tables. Conversations, sitting down with someone and visiting, bringing your elders some food. It is having, becoming relatives with each other. In the early days of the formation of the United States, and when they brought Native leaders to the table, oftentimes many of these were women. And these women undoubtedly would offer to the white founding fathers of this country and say, where are your women and where are your sons? Let's make families together. Because if we can consider each other relatives, there is accountability in that. And I think the white way has been to say that if you're related, there's a conflict of interest. Not for indigenous peoples, and I think not for many people around the world. It is those relations that we have with each other. And it's the kuleana, as the Native Hawaiians say, the sense of responsibility that we're going to take care of each other and not harm each other. So I think having conversations with people in the community to get their thoughts around what solutions they need. The people that are most affected, the girls that are in the juvenile system, asking them, what do you need? I think there's a lot to be said for looking at solutions in people's culture. There's so many teachings. You can see it in all the various indigenous and other languages. So I think there's a video that's very hopeful that I encourage you all to watch. It's on YouTube and it's called We Shall Remain. And it was made by youth from the Coeur d'Alene tribe in Idaho. And it gives me such hope that even against all the challenges that tribal people, Native people, and communities of color face, that we will continue to not only survive, but we will continue to thrive. And that's what gives me hope. So when we talk about warrioring up, I want us to remember that there are different ways that we can warrior up and stand up, and that the fear of violence is real for many people. And so if some of our people can't warrior up in the same way, it's okay. They can stand up and warrior up in different ways. And for those of us that can go to DC and can go to Sacramento, then we need to do that. So that's just some of my thoughts, and I really do appreciate being on this webinar with you all.
Oh, Paula, thank you so much. That's right, and a good reminder that there are some of us who stay home and watch the babies while some of us go to DC. And so everyone has a role. Everyone has a role. We're going to start to kind of wind down. I do want to remind everyone that the rest of the calls to action will be available in the Stand Against Racism location. Would that be on the website? And now I see Maya coming online with all the answers. I'm getting like, you know, get the messages that I'm like, I'm reading off of my phone. What does this mean? So first I'm going to say thank you to everyone. And I'm going to hand this over to Maya, who's going to tell us what to do. Maya, tell us what to do.
So there are a few questions that I'd like to ask you guys that have been submitted by the people watching. But first off, I wanted to thank you all so much for speaking. I feel like I can speak for everyone watching when I say that I'm so inspired by what you all said. But let's move on to the questions. So the first one is for everyone. So whoever feels like answering can go right ahead. And that is, what can we do as ethnically diverse people to support and elevate the narrative every day, as well as create space for communities of color to collaborate around intersectionality? So whoever wants to start with that one.
Maya, this is Paula. I can chime in. So I think these conversations are really important because they provide for the space for people who may not normally feel like they have anything to share or contribute. It provides that space for them. We don't do this advocacy work disconnected from what's happening at the local level. So those conversations, you know, organizing discussions, small conversations with different people in your community, I think is important. This webinar is helpful, you know, offering smaller webinars with people so that potentially they can interact with the speakers. I think it's not a small, don't undervalue what can come out of those discussions.
Absolutely. And then the next one is, the seeds of racism start within our families and then make its way into the classroom where systemized racism sets up our public education system. As we have this chance to restart our public education system, what do you say are the absolute musts in considering how we combat systematic racism in public education coming out of this pandemic?
I believe that racism has made its way into families because of its historical context and how it has impacted individuals within households. So it takes us to also be able to train our families not to, when we're having intimate conversations about interactions with other communities, someone has to be educated in the family to say that's inappropriate to say about this person. And oftentimes that comes back from the classroom. But when you talk about teachers who are overwhelmed already with too many children, low pay, and now we're asking teachers to go back and be educated on cultural competency, and knowing that they begin to understand the diversity of their children, economic impacts, and how that violence can impact economic violence on Black and Brown families can show up in the classroom with behavior. I have a parent who had an addiction when I was young, so I would show up to classrooms all kinds of ways, but culturally, we want to make sure that we train and develop our teachers to be able to teach from a cultural lens, and we also need to train the whole education system to change, because a lot of the books that are provided, even the kids, don't teach them about themselves and whom they are. And so it's kind of a duality. Yes, family teaches you, but when kids are with, I know right now families are really learning a lot about their children now that they're at home 24 hours a day, but now parents can be able to sew into them the educational tools that they need. But typically they're with a teacher that is raising them each year that they go to another grade. So we really do need to invest more dollars and really train our teachers and pay them better as well to do the work in the classrooms. That would be my point there.
Thank you. The next question is for Paula. If you had the opportunity to pick a crucial reentry service needed for our justice-engaged girls and women, what would it be? And what, as well as what programs do you think would help these ladies adjust back into the difficulties of society?
So I'm trying to think, I can't think of, nothing for me comes to mind in Santa Clara County, even though that's originally where I've come from. But I think in general, again, it's having conversations with the young girls that are coming out of detention to ask them what it is they need and really being honest about it. Especially when they say, well, I don't know. Asking them other questions to help them know, because a lot of times they've been silenced. They've been made to feel like they don't know anything. And so they've been used to saying, I don't know. So the other thing that comes to mind immediately is connecting them to their culture any way that you can. So we all know that we have our biological families, but we have our families of choice. My biological family is not the family that I work with on a day-to-day basis. It's my family of choice, which are all my Native brothers and sisters that I've been doing this work with. So giving them, the girls, the opportunity to potentially do coming of age ceremonies. There are people across the country that are doing this. That is something that is helping young girls because they've never had that opportunity. So that would be one concrete suggestion I'd have.
So in Santa Clara County specifically, we have the Young Women's Freedom Center that we have opened up a second branch. It started in San Francisco 25 years ago. The current director was the first client right out of juvenile hall in San Francisco 25 years ago. They are all they do is work with formerly court-involved youth, girls. They pay them a living wage as soon as they get out. They start life coaching, and they do YPAR research, which is youth participatory research. So they are actually going out and talking to girls and finding out what girls need in Santa Clara County. It's a very exciting initiative, and it is coupled with our campaign to end the incarceration of young women and girls in Santa Clara County. We are hearing from the girls. I just want to assure you of that right here in Santa Clara County.
Yeah. Thank you, Judge Lucero. And I don't know if they're talking about it, but I would encourage them to think about connecting them to their Native culture because there's so much strength in that.
And that is exactly what they do. They call it educational empowerment. They're taking right now a Chicano studies class because most of our girls are Latina or Latinx. We have, I don't know if you know, but 50% of the girls in the juvenile justice system in California identify as LGBTQ and non-gender conforming. So we have the right people. We could always use more information and more suggestions, but I assure you the girls are designing their own programs. They're talking to Sacramento, and it's attracting a lot of grant opportunities. So I feel really good about it, but we do need some housing, and we need a permanent location for the center.
Thank you. And then there's one last question I feel like is super necessary in our current climate, and that is, what can the wider non-people of color do to support POC and encourage positive change?
That is a great question. I put in the chat that there's a couple of pieces of information that I want to give a shout out to my American Leadership Forum CEO, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Liberation Affinity Group, and beyond, that has been doing some work using a couple of documents that I put in there. One is a listing. It's an article, but sort of more of like a listing of white supremacy culture and what they are, how does it manifest, and what are the antidotes. So in terms of white people, what can you do? Please take a close look at this, and also take a look at the anti-bias, sometimes called anti-racism continuum. You can self-assess where are you on that continuum, and you can also assess your family, or you can have your organization assess itself. It's really great to sort of pinpoint where are you and where's your organization, because sometimes your organization is ahead or behind, and it's great to understand where are you and make peace with that so that you can move forward. So I think those are two, starting points. They're really important because often I think people get really turned off with like white supremacy and think that that's just simply, a Nazi, a person who drives over 600 miles to El Paso to kill Mexicans. And that is a thing. But white supremacy culture can be actually upheld by all of us if we don't research it, identify it, and know when it's happening so that we can stop those actions.
Right, absolutely. I think that's all we have time for today. Unfortunately, I know this discussion can go on, like you said, tomorrow for days, for weeks even, but I'd like to thank everyone so much for participating, and everyone who joined in on us, thank you so much for coming. We're going to be sending out a survey later on with a follow-up message. Tamara, do you have anything to say in the wrap-up?
Just thank you to everyone. Really appreciate it, and appreciate each and every single one of the panelists and also the staff. Leilani, Maya, Naomi, Tanis, the Y, thank you so very much for opening up this space. And there was a conversation, there's going to be another conversation. So I appreciate that.
Thank you all so much. And if the panelists want to stay on a little bit after everyone goes, we can just debrief real quickly if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, that would be great.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you all.
you.
Yay, good job, everybody.
Are we
We
alone
did
now?
it. Wow. And like most of you shared, we could have, lots of webinars like this and continue the conversation. So, I mean, if the community gets what the community wants. So hopefully in the future, you'll be open to joining us again in the future to continue some of these important conversations. I know that we didn't have as much time as we would like to explicitly kind of share some of our kind of initiatives, calls to action, things like that. So what our team has decided to do, if all of you, for example, Judge Lucero, I know you were talking about the Tia Martinez's kind of school to prison pipeline resources. If you would like to send any of those resources into me and Maya, we would be happy to include that in our Stand Against Racism toolkit, which will be sent out to all of our participants. Hi, Naomi.
Hi, Naomi.
Hi, Naomi.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
We're still online.
Somebody said that we're still online. That's fine. We're not going to talk about these.
Because if I end it, I'm scared that it's gonna like end everybody and everyone goes away. I don't want all of you to go away yet.
Whatever I say here, they can hear. Ah.
We can stop recording now, though. And then
I agree.
So exciting to be here with you all. Judge Lucero, you got something to say.
Oh, I was just going to say that, your first